Ideas, inspiration, innovation. This is The Game Changer. And now here's your host, Chicke Fitzgerald.
Good afternoon. This is Chicke Fitzgerald with The Game Changer. And I am so excited because we are relaunching our show. We've been on hiatus for actually quite a few months. And our very first guest is Chris Vaughan. And Chris is with an organization that you may not have heard of, but you certainly have heard of many of the folks that he serves. His company is called Sequence, and he specializes in growing associations. And again, we don't think about associations a lot in our daily life, but Chris certainly does. Chris, welcome.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
Chris, we want to start the show. And as I shared with you before our broadcast, we are all about ideas and inspiration and innovation. And that really was the foundation of this show 15 years ago when I initially launched it. And so we would love to hear about an experience that you have had launching a key initiative or an innovation where you have been just amazingly successful. And I would love to talk about the elements that actually contributed to that success.
Gotcha. So as you mentioned, we work with associations. So these are our membership organizations. And you've heard of folks like AARP and the American Medical Association and the Bar Association. And those are our clients. And folks like that are our clients. And they come to us with a growth mindset, right? They want more members. They want to grow their revenue. They want to grow their influence, right? And their impact. And that's the business that we're in. And we've been doing this for some time, and an idea dawned on me, sort of popped into my head from a book that I had read called The Essential Advantage a long time ago, that really addressed what I thought was the core problem that most of these folks were actually struggling with, right? Which is they do a lot of things, right? If you look at, what an AARP does, there's probably hundreds of awesome services and products that they deliver to folks, and they serve lots of different kinds of people who need different things. They really struggle to come up with what's different about them, right? What's special about them, right? What is the value proposition that I have to offer that's going to resonate with you, right? As my member or as my potential member. And one reason for that is they don't spend a lot of time looking outwards, right? They're very focused on their mission, as they should be, and serving their members as they should be, but not a lot of time looking outwards, asking people what they don't have and what they want but are not getting.
Right.
And they're also not very good at introspection, looking at themselves and figuring out what they're actually good at, right? Of all the many, many things they do, there's a handful that are really special, right? That really are the special sauce for folks. And the insight was, if we could bring those things together, right? The unmet, unserved needs of this audience, they're not getting anywhere else. And what this organization can do that really nobody else can duplicate, if we could marry those things up, we would really have something, right? Then we would really have the value proposition. So we call that the right to win, right? When you line up the unmet needs of the audience with the unique capabilities of your organization, you have a space where you just have the right to win, right? No one should be able to compete with you. So we built a framework around that. And we call it our way to play framework, right? So we do the research, we do the inside discovery, we bring people together, we workshop this stuff, and at the end of it, we come out with, we call the way to play, which is, how are we going to go out to this particular segment of our audience, and what's the key message on, we're going to deliver this thing you need in a way that nobody can. And we launched that out with our first client, and it was massively successful. It's transformational. They'd never thought about their members that way. They'd never seen themselves that way. There's so much energy around it because they're like, we really are special, right? We really can do this in a way that no one else can. And we can deliver so much value to our members. And it's so clarifying for everyone that it really just accelerates growth. So we do a lot of different things for our clients. We solve a lot of different problems, but that concept is really at the core of everything we do, is how can we help you find your right to win? Using that framework, we have helped clients triple their growth rate in a year. We've helped them grow by 25%. We've helped some clients double their membership in a period of 3 years, right?
Wow.
They've launched multi-million-dollar new businesses. They've multiplied their revenue. Now these are by 10x. So it's fantastically successful initiative. And again, it was sort of inspired by a book that I had read, but we have really adapted it to this space in a way that really is transformational. And our hope is that we can transform this space and we can transform this industry by changing the way people think.
Right. And Chris, you talked about some of your clients, and we know that organizations like AARP are serving consumers.
Yes.
And then you've also got organizations that are clearly associations of professionals and businesses. So how is the B2B different in applying this methodology than B2C?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And we have clients that do both, and we have clients that do both at the same time, right? They serve professionals and businesses, and some serve both, right? Individuals and businesses. The core concept is the same, right? You want to come up with a value proposition that resonates. What's different with B2B clients is the buyer, right? I'm not buying it for myself. I'm buying it for the organization.
Mhm.
So it's a more complicated value proposition because yes, you want something that's going to serve the business, but what's in it for the buyer? How
Right.
can you provide them something that serves their personal needs, whether that's, maybe they want visibility, right? Maybe they want access, maybe they want influence, so we try to build those into the value propositions as well, that there's something for the organization, there's something for your team, and there's something for you as
Right.
an individual to buy. And that can be really transformational too, because it kind of reframes this whole sales conversation like, oh, this is really good for me too, in a way that it's also good for the organization.
Right. And Chris, we were talking the other day about the difference between organizations that are not for profit, right, which is different than being a nonprofit, right?
Yeah.
And I think you probably have clients that are both. Is that correct?
We do. We have most of our clients are not for profits. Some of them also have for-profit subsidiaries that they operate.
Right.
Some of them also have charitable foundations. So there's really a whole range.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between those three?
So a not-for-profit generally is a charitable organization or a trade organization whose charitable purpose is to serve the public or to serve an industry, right? To serve a private industry. And all of their resources go into serving that mission, right? So all the money they generate from dues or from selling products or training or whatever funnels back into the mission, and there's no profit involved, right? Nobody gets to
Right.
Some of them have businesses that operate for profit, that sell products and services, or perhaps do consulting, or perhaps have data businesses. Many of them do, that are very lucrative, but that money from those organizations flows back to serve the organization, right? So we say no money, no mission. And a lot of these organizations have done very well. And we've helped folks do that as well, as spin out businesses that generate revenue that's consistent with the mission, but in a more of a for-profit kind of way.
Right. Right. Well, that's very, very interesting. So a lot of our listeners are actually in the for-profit space.
Sure.
And what kind of advice would you give them, actionable tips of how they can take what you've learned in the not-for-profit space, the association space, and to transform their own businesses and to just really get them poised for greater profits, right? Because of the innovation that they're able to spur.
I think this concept of the way to play and the right to win, there's nothing nonprofit about that, right? There's nothing special about that for nonprofits. It works well in that space because of the kinds of organizations there are. But that works for any business, in my view. The for-profits that we deal with, and we have, I mean, we've dealt with very large for-profits. We've worked with Google, we've worked with IBM, we've worked with State Farm and Allstate and Freddie Mac. They all have the same issue, right? Which is they don't look outward enough or in the right way to really understand their market and what their market needs. And they don't always necessarily articulate what makes them special as opposed to someone else in a particular space, right?
Right.
And that process which the idea, the inspiration, my inspiration originally came from for-profit strategy consulting, right?
Yes.
And we've adopted it. But I think that mentality of, how do we find the sweet spot, right? How do we find that magic spot where who we uniquely are overlaps with what our customers, in this case, uniquely want? I think is, a strategy accelerator, a growth accelerator for anybody.
Well, and I love the right to win mentality, because I come from a space that I run a technology company as my day job, and we have been in kind of the early growth stage for a very long time now, because we got started just before the pandemic, and we make our money primarily on travel and events, and of course during the pandemic that totally
Right.
dried up.
Right.
So not only did we have to step back and look at how we could create that value, but we had to really restart everything after the pandemic. And so when you have been operating on a bootstrap for so very
I
long,
know.
it's easy to lose sight of the fact that you do have the right to win, and that you've earned that right, not necessarily by being successful in the marketplace, but by creating something super unique. And I love the focus on differentiation. That's one of my big things that I love to talk about. So let's talk about the life cycle of an idea in an average organization. I know that really doesn't exist, but I know you've seen a lot of organizations that actually, the minute an idea comes up, there's natural pushback, right? It's kind of like my husband. Every time I come up with any idea, he always says no. But I know that there's a yes coming behind that, right? And a lot of organizations have that same kind of odd culture of while they're contemplating, it comes across as a no instead of,
Yes.
let's think about that. So what has been your experience, Chris?
Well, I completely agree with the corporate antibodies, right? That tend to attack anything that smells of change, right? In an organization.
Oh, I love that.
My
Corporate
clientele,
antibodies.
these associations they're notoriously change averse. We have clients that have been doing things the same way for 150 years. I mean, it's very difficult to
Right.
move these organizations, and yet they do, right? They can change. And COVID was a real accelerator for that, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. A lot of folks got themselves in trouble with their events and other things, and were really forced to work together differently, to think differently, and to take risks, right? That ordinarily they would not have taken. But why does one idea live when another one dies? In our experience, and when we help clients through this process, part of it is the data, right? Is it just an idea in your head, or is there something backing it up? Sometimes this is what the members are telling us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes this is what we're seeing in the marketplace. Sometimes this is what other people are doing and it's working. All those things work to kind of de-risk the idea. Well, if the members want it, or if our competitors are doing it well, maybe we can do it well too. So for us, that's often the starting point, is kind of lowering the risk factor, right?
Right.
Increasing the insights. And the step two is really focus. And the data drives that too. But, as an organization, you could do a million different things, but you can't do them all well. The clients that are the most successful focus on 4 or 5 key things that allow them to concentrate their resources on a new idea like that, right? So why would we focus on this idea? Well, because it serves our strategic goal of, right, eliminating the stigma around mental health or something like that. But because it ladders up to one of the top level goals, it gets energy and excitement and commands resources and moves through. And the last step is the champion. You've got to have a champion for it who's got the juice, to drive the idea and not force people into it, but bring people along and get them excited and enthusiastic about what the outcomes are going to be. It's going to help us drive our strategy, but look what it's going to do for our members. Look what it's going to do to move our mission, right? That's why we're all here. And when you can connect those things for people, lower the fear factor, right? Increase the inspiration factor, that's when these things really happen if they can resource them, and that's where the focus
Well,
comes.
yeah, and that's the big question. So let's go back to the first part. So de-risking. One of the key things that we see is organizations heavily relying on research. And I know organizations, some of whom will remain nameless, who step out and say that they want to spend $500,000 on research, when if they would just put their people in a room, they would find that they already have the answers, and that really it's time to move to strategy. And you can still validate an idea or a concept without spending $500,000 on research. So what are some of the ways that you see people de-risking using whatever resources that they do have?
Yeah, and we completely agree with that. You can certainly over research things.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that happen in organizations where the price of failure is very high, right? So the cost of making a mistake is very high. It could be fatal, right, in some organizations. And so, people are overcautious, overly prepared. It's defensive research in a lot of cases, right?
Yes.
So, but the research company told me that this was going to work. And it can get, and we're big fans of research. I think you can tell to do that. But most of the research we like to do is talking to people, right?
Yeah.
We like to talk to members, and members that our clients don't talk to. They talk to happy members.
Mm-hmm.
They talk to engaged members. They don't talk to members who are about to leave. So we do. And that, like you said, that's where we get the ideas. They will tell you what they think. You get them into the room. Oftentimes we will come back to the team and they will say, "Thank you. We knew that." Right. We've been saying that all along. Right? You just confirmed for us what we already suspected. And that's a good use of research, I think, too, is it's confirmational, right? Which should give you confidence.
Well, I think an underappreciated part of that research is talking to the front line, right?
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
they are the ones who are getting those calls from disgruntled clients or members. And they generally do know the answers, but perhaps the culture internally, like you said, if you've got a huge price of failure, which I think can come from two things, and maybe you have others. One is the member base is so large, right? And that just a minor change can have massive impact. The other is cultural, right? And it has to do with how people behave when there is failure, right? Yeah. And is failure the best teacher, right? Or is it forbidden?
Yes. Yes. And some, it's sad to see it, but some cultures are quite punishing, right? They can be quite punishing around failure. In our experience, it often flows from the top with sort of a very uncompromising, attitude. Other organizations simply lack confidence. They haven't done a lot of innovation. They haven't changed a lot, and they kind of it's awkward and weird. They just don't know, make these things happen. The second problem is easier to solve than the first, right? I mean, you show some people some successes, and they kind of get a taste for it. But the other is harder, and really good leaders that we work with are very conscious about lowering that risk of failure and setting things up where it's okay to learn. Right? It's okay to fail and learn and move on. And we're going to do it in a way that's not going to sink the ship, people, but we have to try new things, and nothing changes until something changes, right? And you have to make that up. Yeah.
Well, the second piece that you talked about is the ability to nurture innovation and new things that are coming down the pike while still operating the business, right? Which that's always the rub, is everybody really wants to work on the new thing, but you've got to keep the current wheels on the bus turning, right? And we used to use a process back when I was consulting full time. We did an integrated planning process where we got everybody involved, did it in a very, very concentrated time frame, just 3 days, and it kicked out a Microsoft project plan that was executable and measurable.
That's really great.
And it also gave them an idea of the impact on every single part of the organization, because quite often, planning isn't done across the organization. But because the investment of time isn't months and months of assessment, it's a few days, then you can decide, okay, now how are we going to prioritize? So how does the work that you do fit in with the normal budgeting and operations process? Are you hired by essentially a chief operating officer type, or are you hired by the people who drive strategy in the organization, or both?
It's really both. It's often the CEO or the COO, right, for a growth initiative, right? We're not growing, perhaps we're declining, we're not sure why, right? How can we do this? Or I've got big goals, right? I want to grow by 40% in the next 5 years. How can you help us do that? That's usually the kind of impetus. Or I want to recruit an entirely different type of member, right? I've recruited doctors, but now I want technicians, right? Can you help us do that? Or I want to launch a new business. So all that's innovation of a sort, right? Of a flavor. And sometimes we're hired to do the strategic planning, but the budgeting and integration around it is tricky. Some of it's timing, right? Is the plan ready when budgeting time rolls around? Is it ready when the board is in a place to talk about and improve things? And we try to design our work very carefully to make sure that happens, that the stars align, or you've got a great idea with no resources for next year, so, which is not the outcome that anybody wants.
Right.
It's interesting. You talk about innovation and innovations in organizations. We've seen people do it two ways. One is they set up an innovation team, over there, and they hire a lot of people and they give them a lot of resources, and they're going to go do something smart, right? Come up with a great idea.
Right.
And then we have other folks that we work with who have teams of facilitators, right? They're basically facilitators who are there to take other people's ideas and help them bring them to fruition. So they gather sort of the pollen around the organization, and they kind of help nurture and cultivate the good ideas, what seem like good ideas, until they're in a position where they can move forward. And the second approach works a lot better, right? When the ideas are organic, they're bubbling up, people can own them, we're here to help, instead of we're not really in the business, we're over here, but we have ideas for what you guys should do. That's hard. Right?
It is. And back, it was a long time ago that I was in corporate life, back in essentially the 80s and the early 90s. And, I was a part of the American Airlines Sabre organization, which was the technology part of the company that was facilitating the distribution of the airline product. And, really, I would say that started as the ultimate think tank, right? Of let's take the system we're already using to run the airline and let's see if we can create a new business out of it, which was essentially providing travel agencies with the ability to book not only American, but, every airline. And so I had the just tremendous opportunity to be a part of an organization that was really foundational to what we see today, with online travel. But here's the interesting thing is I was actually the person that you were just talking about, the person who every time there was a new idea, a blank sheet of paper and a concept, they'd say, let's bring Chicke in, because I could put form and substance on it, right? And pull the team together. I didn't want to operate it, right? But I could help the people who could run with it. And you're right, that was a much, much better way to do things. But it takes that character and the culture at the top. And so I'd like to shift gears just a little bit, and let's talk about leadership. I mean, you've mentioned it throughout what you have been sharing about, what does it take to have a successful initiative. And I love, again, the framework that you've built. I'm a huge fan of applying frameworks, and whether you learn it from a book or someone that you heard speaking, being able to take that and turn that into something that actually can be executable, again, actionable within any kind of an organization. But let's talk about leadership. Let's talk about specifically the commitment that it takes to build a culture of generosity. And I'm going to bring this up because I believe generosity isn't just giving as a company, of donating your money, but it's about finance being willing to help sales, right? Or the different organizations internally giving of themselves to their
Mhm.
colleagues. And you talked a little bit again about failure and about some of the cultural things that are anathema to that, right? So, what has been your experience of the role of purpose-driven leadership in the organizations that you serve?
Yeah, and you mentioned at the top of the show, my clients are all purpose-driven by design, right? They all have a mission. They're here to make the world a better place. They're here to serve other people, and that's just sort of woven into the DNA. But they're also people, right? And they have competing goals, and they have competing points of view. And these organizations can be just as dysfunctional as every other organization, even if we're trying to do good, at the end of the day. And we have the privilege of working with some really amazing leaders, right? Who
Right.
really transform the organizations in incredible ways, and it's just such a joy to work with them. Part of it is that they work very hard to align those goals, right? So, it's not I win, you lose. It's like we win and the members win. And that's not easy in some of these cultures that have been ingrained for decades and decades, as I mentioned. So, who are good at that, right? Sort of, we have a shared goal here. We're going to grow membership, right? We're going to cure cancer. Right? That's what we're up to, and remove those barriers, between people. I think part of it is for some of these leaders, the organization is part of their purpose. So yes, I'm here to serve the public and the members, but I'm also here to elevate this organization and the people in it, right, and bring them along, make them better, right, make us better as a team. And it's just wildly inspirational when you see someone who could do that. But it has to be authentic, right? You can't fake that, right?
Right.
Do you really care? I worked in, I never forget this. Before I did this, my past life, I did a lot of merger integration work, right? Two companies sort of buy each other and combine, which is, a very difficult and emotionally fraught experience. And my boss taught me the two things people care about in that situation are when they look at their new leader, do you know what you're doing? And do you care about me? Those were the two things. And if you could convince them that those were true, they will follow you. And
Mm,
I've never forgotten that. And I see that play out again and again in organizations that are trying to drive transformational change. Are the folks in charge capable? Do they know what they're doing? But do they really care about me and where I end up at the end of it? And where the answer is yes, change happens. And where the answer is no, the fear factor goes up.
right, right. Well, it's interesting because we assume that when you've got a leader at the top who isn't uh, demonstrating those characteristics that you just so
Yeah.
clearly articulated, we assume that there's nefarious intent,
Yes.
control, all of those things. But my experience, particularly, and without naming names, I was in an organization that had so much potential. But in an internal assessment we did with an outside consulting firm, we finally came to the conclusion that the person at the top of the organization was like the cork in a bottle of champagne, right? And again, they thought that that was their role, right? To be at the top of the bottle, right? And really realizing that we had a message to deliver, that
Mhm.
this individual needed to remove themselves, not from the organization, but from
Right.
being the bottleneck, literally,
Yeah.
right, that everything had to go through. And so I know you've had experiences where you've had to deliver a message, maybe to again, the leader of an organization, maybe to an entire leadership team, that the feedback that you're getting is that there does need to be cultural change.
Mhm. Yeah, we have. It's and it's awkward. This was a recent experience we had where the organization had a rocky relationship with the members for some time. They weren't growing. They had a lot of turnover, a lot of churn. And we did our research and we talked to the members. And the truth was the members were pissed. They were really angry about the way that they had been treated over the years. And they felt like it was purely a transactional relationship and the service they got
Mm,
was poor. And they kind of felt like they were being used,
right,
by the organization. And we had to tell them that, right? It's like, your members, they don't quite hate you, but they resent you for sure.
right, right.
And it was tough to hear. I mean, that was really, but it was necessary, right? It was necessary for them to hear that, for them to realize how poor the member focus really was and how much work they had to do to get themselves back in the good graces of the membership. So it's never fun to deliver those messages, but it's critical, and it's important that they hear it.
Right, right. Well, I had another experience where I was in an organization for many years that was that command and control style leadership that you were
Yes.
alluding to earlier, where that was kind of the way businesses were run,
Yes.
in
Yes.
the 70s and the 80s and even into the 90s, and then all of a sudden there was a shift. But if you take those individuals that grew up in that culture and all of a sudden you put them in a culture that there's freedom, it takes a while
It
for
does.
them to loosen. So if you've seen the opposite of a leader coming into an organization that has so much promise, and then you've got the people are the ones holding it back.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. It's like taking a cat out of a crate, the cat just sort of looks around for a while. It's like, I'm not sure I want to leave this crate. I'm pretty happy here. Yeah, it really is an interesting cultural shift. And it really does come from the top 100% of the time, right? The personality and the values and the style of the leader permeate all the way through the organization 100% of the time. So in the example that you gave, when you have those sort of challenges, look up first and say, well, how do they lead? And I'll explain why they act the way they do and why they behave the way they do. And the best leaders that we work with they're open to that feedback. That's why they hire us, is because they don't hire us because they want us to sugarcoat it. They
Right,
want
right.
someone to tell them the truth. It's like you don't want to go to the doctor and have them tell you you're fine, right? You're not. That's why you're there. And so the best leaders are really open to that and willing to make the changes, and other leaders really struggle, and we have to help them along.
Right. Well, I think I shared with you that our company has adopted a tagline of give more, make more.
I
And
like that. I
you
like that.
might think that that's a funny tagline for a technology company,
Mm,
but it gets back to what I was talking about is again, I grew up in that command and control uh, kind
yep,
of organizations,
me too.
throughout the early part of my career. And again, finance and legal were those they were the roadblocks in the
Yeah,
organizations,
yeah,
right? And I see now a much more collaborative business style and culture. I don't consult anymore, as a general rule, although I still do it for friends and projects that I find really intriguing. But I'm just wondering about your experience in that arena.
yeah. I did too. I came up, through technology and strategy consulting, and it was very much like that at the time. Associations are very, very different. This is one of the ways they are so different, and why they need a different kind of consulting approach.
Mm-hmm.
They're absurdly collaborative, right? Hyper consensus driven, right? It's really impossible to make a decision unless everyone is on board with it. We call it pathological democracy, right? Because literally one person can shut down an entire project, and it's just baked in. It's just kind of the way they work. It's sort of their culture, but it presents entirely different leadership challenges, right? Command and control would not last for 10 seconds in this organization. They would just look at you like, what are you doing? Instead, you have to convince, you have to cajole, you have to bring people along and get the right people in the room at all levels. So it's really quite a trick. And we have client leaders who are outstanding at doing this. But part of it's diplomacy, you know what I mean? Part of it's listening, part of it's building trust and all those sorts of things. And it's one of the things we really enjoy about this environment. But
Right.
people who come from the outside, who come from these corporate environments, it's like landing on another planet for them. Like
Oh,
literally,
oh no, I can tell you firsthand, and I shared with I
right?
shared with you. I walked into a meeting room one day, and as I was preparing for the meeting, the CEO was walking by, and he said, "Oh, you must love us," because I had been there for several years
Yeah.
doing various projects. And I said, "Actually, no, I just changed the year on the agenda from this meeting. So for a year, we have been talking and trying to get that level of
Exactly.
collaboration going." And it was something that I knew instinctively was a really, really good idea for them. But boy, it was just It really was something that I couldn't get past. And I'm wondering now whether it's because I had come out of the for-profit structure. And again, I wasn't wanting command and control, but at the same time, you can't let people spin their wheels for 365 days.
You absolutely cannot. And some of our best clients are folks that have come from for-profit to not-for-profit and then call us to kind of be their Sherpa and help them navigating. And, in a couple of 3 years, they get it, but it does take that long for them to really understand, how things work at the organizations. And they do. From the outside, you would imagine they would never work. But these organizations are obviously amazingly successful and they do amazing things. But it's a real shift. We dig it, but I think a lot of people might.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, your experience really is fascinating to me. So, in the minutes that we have left, I really would like to get to know Chris Vaughan, right? And you can go back as far as you want, because I think, as we look at who we are and who we become over time, right? There is someone that we were meant to be, right? Where we find a place, and perhaps you're there, or maybe it's ahead of you, where you say, "Oh, for such a time as this is why all of those things happened," right? I go back and I knit together all the things, American Airlines and Sabre and WorldSpan and CETA and all the different roles I've had, and then all of the clients I've had. And then I look at how it's prepared me for this particular role, right? And for everything that I'm doing. And again, even this interview, I think about the things that you're saying and how I can apply that to my company, right? So where did this desire to help, right? Because fundamentally, if you're in the consulting business and you're helping people grow, there has to be a time where you think, yeah, I might like to do that, right? When did that happen for you?
Yeah, it's kind of I think it's a funny story. Anyway, I was trained as a philosopher, actually. That was my background. I have
Wow.
a PhD in philosophy, and I wanted to be a teacher. That's what I wanted to do. And I want to talk about the meaning of life, and I wanted to talk about right and wrong. And I wanted to
I
talk
think
about,
you're doing it, by the way.
yeah, I want to talk about all those things. But I wanted to teach, college kids to do that. And it was really exciting. And I did briefly teach that, but it was a time in the 80s when they're just really hard. There just weren't a lot of jobs for professors or people like me. And, philosophy is not the most lucrative field of human endeavor. So I needed a plan B. And I looked around and, I knew philosophy and computers, and that was really about it. So I got a job working for a technology firm, initially working on the help desk, right? Helping secretaries do word processing. That was kind of my first real job. But I was a curious guy, and I like to learn things and I like to help. So I learned a lot, and I moved myself up, and I got a job in the consulting side of the organization, which was a real coup. I mean, that's kind of where all the cool kids were. And I did really, really well, and I started to make a bit of a name for myself, and I started to get known around the region. And a recruiter called me and offered me a job in what turned out to be one of the fastest growing consulting firms of the 80s. The company went public the next year, and it was the most successful IPO of the year. So it was really an incredibly successful organization. And I was there for 10 years. I made partner very quickly. I ended up with an international role, leading alliances and strategic alliances and doing mergers and acquisitions type of stuff. So I'd come a long way from, reading Plato. Things were going well. I met my wife there. She worked there as well. And we quit in 2001 to start this firm, Sequence Consulting, right? The dot-com bubble had popped, right? Everything had changed. Technology wasn't what it was. On the one hand, we felt like there was a better way to do consulting that was more about helping the clients and less about lining our pockets. That never felt good to us. And also, we were more interested in helping people who help other people. So pure luck, by pure luck, we met a friend of a friend who introduced us to our very first client, which was AARP, right? Which is the largest association in the world. So that is a lot like saying we wanted to play football, and our first game was the Super Bowl.
Right.
But that really opened our eyes and inspired us, right? We knew them for, discounts at Denny's and insurance commercials, but there is so much good work that goes on there, so much money they raise, right? So many ways they help, senior poverty, and I could just go on and on. And we were so moved, right? We came in every day and we were working with, there's 2,000 people who get up every day and do nothing but work to make life better for all of us as we age. And we're like, we get to help them. We're in. We're in. This is our business. And so we decided to focus on organizations like that. And we've been doing that for the last 23 years. So
well, intellectual curiosity. I tell my children and I tell people that I interview when I'm putting together teams that, to me, intellectual curiosity is the number one skill that I look for. Maybe skill is even the wrong term,
yeah.
but it's the number one thing I look for, because you can teach people how to do things, right? But unless they have intellectual curiosity, they can't look for themselves about how to make that better, right? And so that is something that I'm always attracted to, which tells me why I'm so attracted to your style and your approach, because what you have done and what you've accomplished. And I had mentioned that it wasn't my first client, but AARP was like the reboot of my consulting practice after my first startup, and my first startup didn't go well commercially, although I had raised $7 million and built an amazing platform, right?
Yeah.
And that all sounded really great until you realize you needed 10 million, right? And you only raised 7, right? And then the economy tanks, and I don't even know if I shared with you the story, but I actually got a call from a friend. I hadn't consulted probably in 5 years. And I got a call from a friend who said, AARP is looking for somebody to do this research project. And, I do appreciate research, but that's not my go-to on where to start with a client. Sure. And so I had just come off of this, literally bankruptcy from this startup that didn't go well. And I didn't even have the money to get on an airplane to go to Washington, D.C. Oh, wow. And I was on a call. I used to run a group called the Executive Girlfriends Group. And we had a call every Friday, and I would have an author or an expert on the call. And at the end of the call, we would just kind of go around the table and, what are your high points and low points? And, I'm like, well, my high point is I have this opportunity to go and pitch AARP. My low point is, I can't afford to get on the airplane. And one of the women on the call gave me her American Airlines frequent flyer miles. Another one who was on the call, who happened to live in Washington, D.C., I had never even met her. She said, oh, my husband and I are going to be out of town that week. Why don't you come and stay at our apartment? And so all I had to come up with was the money for the metro and whatever I was going to eat, really. And I won this deal with AARP that turned into, many, many hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of consulting, and a really, really satisfying experience. There were some amazing people there. And like you, I didn't really know who they were until I got inside, right? And then you just meet all of these amazing purpose-driven people. So tell me a little bit about your orientation for giving back, because I can tell that because you get a lot of satisfaction from helping people, that that had to be instilled in you at some point. And I grew up, my dad was a pastor, and giving was just kind of what people did. Where did that come from for you?
That's a great question. I don't know that I've ever really thought about it. It's sort of baked into Chris. I'm a teacher at heart. I think that's I'm a learner, and I'm very curious, but more than anything else, I just love to teach, right? I want to share what I know, and I like to see people grow and expand. And I think that a lot of what we do is that. I think a lot of it's sort of teaching people, right? Helping them understand, sort of showing them the way. And I get a lot of personal satisfaction out of that. And I think we also have a generous mindset. I mean, we have a couple sayings here sequence that everyone has to learn. And one is find a way to say yes, right? Just find a way. We have a scope of work and we've agreed to do what we've agreed to do. But if they need something, if they ask for something, find a way. You want us to come to another meeting? Okay. Right. You want us to look into something else for you? We will. Right. As much as we possibly can. And we do that. And it's good for the client relationship, of course, right? There's a pennies in the bank, but it's also good for us, right? Because we see ourselves helping more. We're doing it for free, I suppose, right? But it's just out of the spirit of generosity and genuine caring for our clients and their success, right? We're invested in their success and we're going to do whatever we can reasonably do to help them do that. And the second saying is once a client, always a client, which is that buy-in never stops. If we've invested in you as a client, we always will be, and we'll be thinking about you, and we will call you if we see things, and you can call us, and they do. They call us to talk about stuff that has nothing to do with the work that we did with them. And we're happy to take the call because we're here to help, right? I mean, we see that as our mission is to help them achieve their missions. And it's extraordinarily gratifying, but it creates a lot of opportunities for generosity, if that makes sense.
Oh, definitely. Well, it's interesting because I've told my team that they actually have to ask permission to say no. It's
I like that
corollary of what you're talking about.
I love that. Actually,
you think back to your help desk days, right? And the days of being on the phone, you always had to ask permission to say yes, right? Because the first answer is generally no. And I didn't want that to be our client's experience with us.
Exactly.
And again, you in my business where you got travel that is happening and potentially travel problems that are cropping up, you have to be willing to do 100% refund on something that wasn't your fault, right? Which, I can't control whether there are bed bugs in a hotel. Now, I can make sure that hotel is never listed in our system ever again, right? But am I willing to refund, a $230 stay? Yeah, because the whole experience, the client doesn't know where you start and other providers and things do, where that leaves off. So, I really, really love, I want to touch back on one more thing before we wrap up. And Chris, you were talking about your days with the consulting firm and doing M&A. And I did a fair bit of M&A in my career as well. And one of the things that you do see during that time is the opposite of generosity. You do see people who are all about profit and all about money and all about eking out every possible penny, right? Rubbing the nickel until the buffalo wears off, right? And sometimes that's the inspiration for generosity, is not wanting to be like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How much do you think that played a role for you?
Well, I mean, certainly a lot in our own turning outward. I mean, we were a publicly held company, very competitive time. We were a very competitive industry. We had very ambitious and frankly greedy leadership in the organization. And a lot of things happened that shouldn't have happened. I mean, a lot of things happened that were wrong, that were dirty, sometimes illegal. For the reasons that you're talking about. And it felt bad. It felt dirty. It felt like we weren't here to help the clients. We were here to take their money. Right. If the solution didn't work, so what? Right. We're going to move on. Look at the stock price. That felt terrible. And when we stepped away, we're like, hey, did we really help them or not? Right. And the answer often was no. And so we started our company with the idea that we are here to actually help people. Among other things. And it was one of the attractions of nonprofit for us is no one's money motivated. No one. That's not it, right? It's some other calling for us. So it feels good to us. It feels clean in a sense. We go to bed, we sleep well at the end of the day because we know we did good work for good people who are trying to do good things. And I do think that our as much as we learned in that consulting company and as much as our skills developed, it felt really, really bad. And we didn't want to feel that way again.
Well, the interesting thing about giving, and what we have found in, again, this notion that if you give more, you make more.
Yeah.
Giving is a principle as sure as gravity, right? You cannot step off the third story of a house and not fall to the ground,
True.
right? You also can't give without receiving.
Yeah.
And it's, the tide goes out and the tide comes in. You breathe out and you breathe in. And that is what the principle of giving is about. And I know it can be frustrating for people who see those that give who aren't giving of a pure heart. They're giving because it's an item on their checkbox, right?
Yes. Right.
And you've seen this in corporate programs with nonprofits where, they agree to do something, but everything else about the organization just screams, those things that we were just talking about. And, again, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. We have to realize that, but to also say, it's still worth it, right? I'm worth it. We can make a difference. Yeah. So, if you had to boil everything that we've talked about down, so we've talked about innovation and we've talked about leadership and we've talked about giving, what would be, and maybe we can come back to you reiterating those things that are the tenets of your plan that you lay out for companies when you're trying to help them grow. So why don't you recap those for us, and then you can perhaps just bring it to a close by what's the one thought that you want to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, turn outwards, right? Start there, right? Really turn outwards, really listen, really understand what people need on the one hand. Be honest, right, about yourself and thorough in your introspection about who you are and what you're really good at and what you can deliver, and then figure out how to bring those things together, right? Figure out how to do what you do best for people who really need it the most. And that's the key, I think, for success in membership and associations, and I think in, probably any business, right? And for us, we do that in the spirit of service, right? We do that in the spirit of helping. Right. We do that. Our mission, as I said, is to drive other people's mission. And in our world, purpose is the inspiration, right? It's the purpose. Like, it's so important to do what we do. How can we do it better, right? How can we do more of it? How can we embrace that? And then as leaders, how do we create the conditions for real change and real innovation that makes a real difference by lowering that fear factor,
right?
And getting people aligned with the same vision, and the same goals.
So, Chris, what's next for you? Is this a business that you do until you can't do it anymore? Do you find a way to turn it over, to folks who are coming up behind you? What's next?
I can't imagine not doing it, honestly. I mean, we would do this for free if we could. We can't. So any clients listening, don't get any ideas. I don't see any reason to stop. We love what we do. We love our jobs. We love our clients. We feel like we're making a difference in the world. I mean, I think we'll just, we're not going to stop until we drop. At least now. Retirement feels like punishment to me personally. Right. So I think we're in it. We'll see at the end of the day, right? Maybe there's a transition plan at some point, but it's not top of mind for us.
Right. Well, it's interesting because my husband is turning 74, and I'm not ready to retire anytime soon. He's like, well, if I retire and you're still working, that won't work. It's like, well, okay, then something big has to happen.
Exactly.
But I'm working toward that too. So
yeah.
Well, Chris, let's just wrap up with you sharing with folks how they can reach you and how they can learn more about Sequence, and then we will say goodbye.
That sounds great. Sequenceconsulting.com. That's our website, so you can find out more about us and what we do and our clients and read some of their success stories. And the contact information is there, and feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk more about what we can do.
Fabulous. So we have been talking to Chris Vaughan. Chris is the founder and CEO of Sequence. They are association growth experts. And if you run an association or know someone that does, they will want to know Chris Vaughan. Chris, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really great.
It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to The Game Changer. Ideas, inspiration, innovation with Chicke Fitzgerald.